think that's a good way of looking at it, where in the finance sense at least, you can buy an option, and that gives you leverage.
I see what you mean.
To get like a return, but I think that also the form of exercising an option looks like a pivot.
Yeah, right. Which is translating it into, the product of the business space. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so if something doesn't
go opportunity to make money. Yeah.
So it's like if something doesn't go according to plan, can we take what we have and parlay it into something else? Or if it does go according to plan, or not even an or, and if it does go, what are we doing here? If it does go according to plan, how do we make sure that we have as much leverage as possible? And that's really like I think a big part of decision making is making sure that every decision factors in both those, where it's like, how do you mitigate loss by creating more options, and then how do you maximize gains by making sure that you're levered in a way that you can take advantage of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny though, because as we started this drive, it was around.
So let's jump right into it. There's a couple of things that we were just talking about, and then there's like a list of things that we had put on our radar to talk about.
Yeah, bring up that stuff we were just talking about
how it's not about the product.
Yeah, we had a big conversation about like how much of getting started or getting traction and running a business is the product versus, I guess the mission that you're selling, or like the mission that you're on.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's another factor, right? That's more important. But I think we put a lot of stock in our product so far.
Yeah, and I think a product is a necessary component. You have to have something that you're producing and putting out there.
Right.
And I think the problem that I'm noticing is so many people speak so opaquely about what the actual thing that breaks through is. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think people don't necessarily know too, because you work multiple channels. So we're building products, we're also going out and marketing, we're also meeting people, and then one thing might be the domino that knocks everything else over and basically opens up the door for us to reach the market. But you don't really know what that is. Like one thing that I'm just coming back from is this networking event, Black Tech Saturdays, downtown Detroit. They're having this all-day event where they're bringing founders, investors, and they have all these presentations and breakout sessions. And there was a lot to learn, but it was also like checkpoints in where we are with our product versus other people. I'm like, it seems like it's not just about the product. It seems like there's more to it, because it's one thing if, hey, we don't have any type of fit, but it seems like a lot of people there are still trying to find their fit.
Which, to call this out, is post-funding.
Post-funding, yeah.
Which is the thing that we keep coming back to, which is that we've done all of this progress, and we've done it pre-funding.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're a lot farther ahead than the people that got funding.
Yeah.
And so the logical conclusion that we're drawing is, if you just, give us some fuel for our fire, we would be 10 times ahead of that. And so, like, that's where I think you're right. It's not always only about the product, but kind of what you're saying kind of leads, like, what I'm thinking back to, like, there is an element of luck in everything. But, like, all of the hard work that we're going to do puts us in a position where that luck can take over. Because even if that luck is, 2 or 3%, you have to do all of the hard work to put yourself in a position for you to be lucky.
Yeah, it's like they say, like, luck is preparation meeting opportunity.
100%.
And I feel like we are on that place where we are almost over prepared, which I think is ultimately a place where that, like, it helps. I think that that's a benefit. But I think the one thing that I look back on, I'm like, okay, this could be, well, two things. One is I think like this whole process is kind of like, which they don't really talk about, is it's kind of like a mind fuck.
Okay, what do you mean by a mind fuck?
It's a mind fuck.
And what process specifically are you talking about?
Of building a company,
okay,
founding a company, and
Running.
running a company, but specifically like the early stage startup space it's kind of a mind fuck. It's not really intuitive. It's very counterintuitive.
Do things that don't scale.
But it's like, even that, it's like, well, what does that mean? To me, that's like a nice button up conclusion, but it's not like a practical stepping stone. Or even when people say build things that people want, like that's on the Y Combinator website. But
That's
it's like,
true.
what does that actually mean? Because it's like, if you could just deliver everything that people wanted, it's like almost, then of course like you'd have like everything would have worked out. At that point, you wouldn't need Y Combinator. But I think which is kind of where they're going to. But it's like almost like saying, hey, if you want to be good at basketball, score a lot of points. It's like, yeah, that's the point, right? But like,
Yeah, you're right.
It's
You're right.
kind of opaque in the sense that you have to get it to get it. But what I'm looking at now is like, I'm starting to wonder how much of those people that advertise those messages are like understand what they're putting out.
Yeah, I saw like an analogy recently online that they were talking about how there's like a lot of tech bros that will apply the same thinking that worked for them in the kiddie pool to the ocean.
Okay, expand on that.
There are certain scenarios and there are certain markets in this country where your product can do really, really well and you can get almost instant product market fit, but you're playing almost with guardrails. Like one of the big waves that happened in the last 12 months was that whole AI agent, phase where literally 95% of all the YC funds were an AI agent. And so those cohorts were just getting usage off of each other. But then as soon as you release them into the world, it's like, oh shoot, like only a couple of these things are going to survive.
Yeah.
And so you can't take that same mentality that worked when you were in the San Francisco market to doing things that don't scale, to making sure that luck is working for you, and take it out into the nation and expect you to have that same kind of success. A little bit of that also comes in with this whole like Doge thing that we're saying.
Yeah.
Being able to run the government like a startup, which there's opinions both ways on that, but it's just interesting how like the nuances of the context where you're applying the things that you've learned matter a lot. You can't just like broad brush and say, oh, it worked for me 20 years ago or even 5 years ago. It's got to work today.
It's interesting you bring up the Doge thing, because that's one of those examples where if you were to go to the government pre-Doge,
Yeah.
we could even use Twitter. I think that's a better example.
Sure.
The government is a hot topic, right? You
Sure,
go to
yeah.
the government pre-Doge,
Yeah.
and you say, okay, or not the government, you go to Twitter pre-Elon, and you say, okay, what does it take to operate this company at scale? And they're gonna say you need all of these people.
100% of what we have.
Yeah, 100% of what we have. We need all these people that are making X amount of dollars per month, and then like people in that ecosystem, if they're going and advising companies, they're like, you need to have like beer at the office, so you need to be spending $800 per meal to get these people in here because that's what they need to work hard. Until you have somebody come in there and say, no, that shit is not necessary at all.
Right.
Cut it all.
Right.
Like, let's only focus on the things that we need and let's maximize that. And then you see the product grow, at least from a feature set, exponentially. It's like the shit that they've been putting out the last few years has been way better than the shit that they were just coasting on for the 15 years that they had, the 10 years that they had Twitter out previously.
I think, so like a lot of that is subjective, but I think the most important metric for me is that they actually haven't lost a whole lot of velocity, if any. And that's the important thing, is that like, even like what, if they're shipping the same quality of stuff before, or even maybe a little bit less, the fact that you can get rid of 80% of the machine and keep the same velocity speaks to a much bigger underlying issue that I think he was addressing.
Right. And then it's like you scale that to the government, and you're like, okay, that seems to be something that's happening in society in general.
Yeah.
And like where there's like a bureaucratic the nature of things where people don't really have to move unless they're like actually fearful of losing something, or they're compelled to go and get something.
And I think that point right there that you made, I think is super critical in examining the two different markets that we see, particularly with tech, between like San Francisco and Detroit. the people in Detroit, even if they have the money, aren't going to go out of their way to invest it in these up and coming startups unless, like you said, they're forced to go out and make a play, or they're forced to go, you know what I mean? They're being a lot more reserved. Whereas I feel like in the San Francisco market, there's a lot more chances being tried, a lot more people at bats.
A concept I've been thinking about over the last few days is clarity over consistency, and it's not a direct comparison to this situation, but the clarity aspect is, because I think in these bigger markets like San Francisco, they understand the upside more, and so they're willing to take different risks because it doesn't feel like, to them, the risk is not investing. If you don't invest, you're losing.
The risk is not investing.
Is not investing.
Versus here,
the risk is investing.
It's the opposite, and that's, I think you nailed it on the head there, where it's like the incentive structures don't align for people in Detroit to actually go through pre-seed, Series A funding, like
to the scale that they're doing over there,
efficiently, to the part where there's probably just as many good ideas, probably not as many, but a good amount of good ideas that can be funded, but that whole process is non-existent.
Yeah.
The entire infrastructure is non-existent, really.
Yeah, and I think they're starting to build it up here, but to me, it's like, when I'm talking with people, the information is just so, it's such a different level of understanding here than it is in the different Bay Area city, or Bay Area, even in like New York, Miami started to also to feel it. Because I think this is something that can apply almost everywhere, in every situation, especially in like the corporate spaces, but it really does start from the people that have the pocketbooks. If they understand the value of making certain moves, then other people start to say, oh, okay, they start to feel the permission to be able to go and make those moves and invest. And over there, it's like the richest people are over there going like, hey, this is how I'm making my money. But over here, it's different. Like, it's inherited wealth. It's like the Fords. And so they're not forced, or like Illich and stuff like that. They're not forced to go and make a move because they don't have to. And so everybody else is like, well, that's our example of how money moves around here.
So we're going to follow that. So we're going to hold it, and we're going to safeguard it, which is, it works, but it's also like, we would like to get into that, bubble and say like, hey, like, we can actually bring all the kind of growth that we're trying to bring to Detroit way faster if you just, pump some of this money into these growing startups that have really good numbers, good products, good teams behind them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I really think that people aren't seeing right now, is like how many really good, talented people are in the city or around the city that can do all of the things that people are asking for. It just, they need the fuel to go do it.
It's one of those things, like, all right, so this is pulling from like some of the music production stuff that I've done in the past, but I have a friend who's really talented, and he is also very particular. It kind of fucks up because can also be working on different things and not be as fast to do something, but he's very, very, very particular on what quality looks like and sounds like. And so we'll get a mix back, and a mix is just when you take the sounds and you organize it in a way where you can hear it as clear as possible and it's true to what you actually want to put out there. And so we would get a mix back for the songs, and he'd be like, it's just not there yet. Like, it's just not there yet. And you hear it and you're like, this is the best one that we've had so far. He's like, yeah, but my reference point is different. He's like, I'm thinking about what we're hearing on the radio. How do we get that sound? And a lot of people will be like, yeah, but like, this is good. Like, this is good. But holding those standards is so important, because it's hard to imagine seeing yourself in that position where you have like a radio quality thing, or you have like a top tier performance, or a top tier product, or a quality product. And because it's hard to see that, it's easy to regress back to the mean and be like, well, everybody else that I know is putting out average stuff and like mediocre stuff, which gets the job done, but isn't at that tier. And I think and you can see it, but if you can't see yourself doing that, then it can become difficult. So if you go back and you look at the investor side and the VC side and the angel side, if people in their small circles are all like, yeah, like that's the San Francisco guys. We're not that though.
Right.
You need somebody who's like, no, we're that, and we're better, and we're going to go and start taking more chances and being more aggressive. I see some people starting to, like, it's entering the conversation here, but it's not to the point where people are effortlessly and unconsciously taking action like it's a default. Again, it's like the incentive structure is different. Like people think that it's more risky to do that, whereas in Silicon Valley, it's like they think it's risky to not do that because other people are going to be doing that, and then you see the income differential
over time,
and you're like, oh shit. When people move and they make those big investments and those bets hit, it makes other people poorer because humans and people are we're relative creatures. Relativity is a fundamental of reality, proven in the physical sense, but it's like it's something that is just a fundamental thing with how people operate. IQ, that's a relative measure. In classes, a lot of times, like, they round it, and it's a relative measure. Even here, it's like wealth is a relative measure. If one person has $1 trillion and another person has $1 or $10,000 or whatever, it's like, that's the difference.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's the wealth gap. So, I don't know.
That's very interesting. Very interesting.
Time to order.
Yes.
Oh, hey, whoa.
Yeah, the name's going to be Jake.
It made it clear, because sometimes you have something, you have something, and the world isn't understanding it right away. And then they understand it and they're like, oh, okay, I got it. But then sometimes it's like you don't have something and the world is just being honest.
Yeah.
And so it's like being able to tease out that difference
100%.
and know where you lie and when is the skill of being an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I think that's where, like,
when
really
to pivot, when to double down.
Yeah, and that's really where the outsized returns come from.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You know?
Jake. Yep. Hey.
Yeah. That's where the outside returns come from, where you get a
when the market starts to get the idea that you're putting out, you know,
yeah,
and
they're
then
like,
it's like,
oh,
wow,
yeah, well, why don't you
that is valuable. I should be using that.
Yeah.
And they start using it, you know.
yeah, you have to have like a ridiculous trust in like self, and then leave yourself options. I think that's another thing too. It's like knowing how to leave yourself options in a couple different moves.
What do you mean by leave yourself options?
I think I don't think moves have to be
You mean like pivots?
pivots. Like pivots would be like options. Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Where, in the finance sense at least, you can buy an option, and that gives you leverage.
I see what you mean.
To get like a return, but I think that also the form of exercising an option looks like a pivot.
Yeah, right. Which is translating it into, you know, the product of the business space. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so if something doesn't
an opportunity to make money. Yeah.
So it's like if something doesn't go according to plan, can we take what we have and parlay it into something else? Or if it does go according to plan, or not even an or, and if it does go, what are you doing here? If it does go according to plan, how do we make sure that we have as much leverage as possible? And that's really like I think a big part of decision making is making sure that every decision factors in both those, where it's like, how do you mitigate loss by creating more options, and then how do you maximize gains by making sure that you're levered in a way that you can take advantage of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny though, because as we started this drive, it was around the sayings and the phrases that people say that are really cool buttons, but have a lot of nuance to them.
Yeah,
especially in how they're applied, and that might be one of those.
Okay. With like the which part of it though?
Leaving yourself options for pivots. I think.
Right. So one thing that, like, to bring it more down to earth is, I think there's a questioning process of, okay, if this doesn't work out, like, what's the real downside?
Yeah, being completely honest with that too.
Yeah, like, what's the real downside? And on top of that, like, if this doesn't appeal to the group that I'm
pushing it towards,
are there other people that I could push it towards?
Right.
And so I think that's where, like, maybe it becomes a little bit more tangible and less, vague, where and more exercisable, where it's like, okay, I can start this idea out. Here's my target audience and that I'm pitching it to. And if it doesn't work out with this target audience, here are 2 or 3 other people that I can make these cosmetic tweaks and make like a new product.
A small lift for a totally different angle.
Right. And so I think like this might be like another conversation, but I think it's goes down to understanding what a product actually is, in the sense that it's what you're producing, and knowing like that there's levels of product where there's certain things that you can't really change about a product without putting in a lot of effort, but there are some things that you can change with a product, such as like the colors, such as the name, such as the layouts. Like still something you could change, but it's, you know, like a little bit lower on in terms of the scale of like what's really easy and then what exactly. And so you have like that layer, and it's like knowing the effort that it takes to change things and how that can change the product, because you can take something you have and transform it into something that's valuable to somebody else without necessarily doing much. It might even be just like, okay, we've built this product, but I want to be able to, it's not really resonating with a specific type of people, but I think it might resonate with those people more. Yeah. Maybe just the way I'm talking about the product.
The framing could be
enough to...
big enough of a difference, yeah.
And so that's the thing where I'm like keeping options open, where it's like, okay, if we have this one thing, it can appeal to other people. We think it'll work with this group the most, but it might not, because for a variety of reasons. But you can do a lot without actually changing the internal essence of what
the core value that you're bringing.
Yeah.
That will be another episode that we're gonna have to go down into, like the depths of how we look at product, how we define product, and then how that influences what we build and how we decide to build. I think it's gonna be super interesting, especially as you guys are keeping track of like all the updates that we're pushing out every week.
No, that's a fact. Those are all good questions that I think we can jump off with next. Actually, we should just jump off with those ones next week.
I like it.
Pending no other crazy revelation happens.
There's always crazy revelations happening. It's entrepreneur space. I will, hold on. Let me back up so you can actually get out without the snow.
Oh, yeah.
That's close enough.
Oh, shoot.